right, now we're on to week 124 of World War II, January 9th, 1942. Washington, D.C. abandons the troops in the field. Gasp. I am going to guess it is talking about the troops in the Philippines. That is really the only place where the Americans have active duty troops fighting. Let us see if my guess is correct.
Wait, so they won't get there in time? I mean, that sucks. Oh no, but what did they say when you told them? What did they say? You didn't. And you're not going to, but why not? No. January 9th, 1942. What do you do when your country has been invaded and you've lost men in the millions and land in the millions of square kilometers, when you've lost virtually every battle and been repeatedly outclassed in the field? Well, if you're Joseph Stalin, you fight back, and you fight back big.
Of course, Soviet capitulation would have just resulted probably in more deaths because, they're Slavic. And Hitler did not like Slavs. Oh. But surely Stalin could have, not purged talented generals earlier on in his political career and before the war, and maybe they would have been in a better place.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Allies declared the United Nations to fight the Axis powers. Their forces were pulling back, though, in both Malaya and the Philippines, as were the Axis in North Africa. The fighting continued in the USSR, and is, in fact, about to get more intense. On the evening of the 5th, Stavka has a meeting of great importance. The gigantic Red Army counteroffensive about to begin. Georgy Malenkov and Lavrenti Beria from the State Defense Committee are also present, as is Army Chief of Staff Boris Shaposhnikov and even Deputy Premier Nikolai Voznesensky, who ran the military economic program. In January 1942, the Soviet leader was incredibly overambitious and optimistic. The contrast between...
Sounds like an authoritarian leader. They almost always are. Oh, overly ambitious and extremely optimistic in their chances.
Between the desperation of November and the success of December...
How I wish I could live in that delusion. Oh, life would be so much better.
...encouraged him so much that he attempted to expand the counterattacks near Moscow into a general offensive to encircle all of Army Group Center and much of Army Group North. Stalin became convinced that the Germans were on their last legs, and he attempted to rush into an exploitation without concentrating his forces and eliminating bypass German units. So on the 7th, the Soviet offensive begins along the entire front, mainly against Army Group Center, sure, but against German forces from Leningrad down to the Crimea. General Georgy Zhukov and company argue that this will dissipate their strength too much, and that the attacks so far have worked because they used local concentrations of force, like tank and cavalry brigades and ski battalions, but these are now under strength. From the Moscow battlefront, the Kalinin and Western fronts are to attack Vyazma from north, east, and south and surround the German forces. See, Ivan Konyev's Kalinin front is to advance through Rzhev and Syshevka towards Vyazma, while the left wing of Zhukov's Western front attacks Gunther von Kluge's German 4th Army around Iukov and then reaches Vyazma from the southwest and links up with the Kalinin front.
That is an extremely ambitious encirclement, my guy. The Germans never even succeeded in pulling off a big encirclement like that. What makes you think you can do it? What?
Pavel Belov's cavalry, reinforced with tank brigades, is to try and break into the German rear and meet up west of Vyazma. Zhukov's master plan is to destroy the German 9th and 4th armies and the 3rd and 4th Panzer armies. The threat to the Germans was indeed real, as a gaping hole existed in German defenses south of Kaluga. Within days after the offensive commenced, Belov had passed through this hole into the German rear near Vyazma. At the same time in the north, Pavel Kurochkin's northwestern front attacks the German 16th Army south of Leningrad. To the south, Yakov Cherevichenko's Bryansk front attacks towards Orel and Bryansk at the southern flank of Army Group Center to try and cut off the 2nd Panzer Army. With many of these attacks, there are going to be terrain issues. Southwest of Moscow, there are exactly 2 paved highways. The one coming from Minsk through Smolensk and Vyazma, and the one from Roslavl through Maloyaroslavets to Moscow. Forces moving along or near these routes outpace those that don't. Another thing that happens this week is that Stalin begins really throwing his airborne troops into battle, though some already saw action at Kerch last week. What they're going to do now is assist Red Army units that have broken into the German rear and sabotage German logistics and supply lines. The first ones are to assist the 33rd and 43rd Armies. On January 3rd and 4th, paratroops hit the roads west of Medin and link up with the advancing troops a few days later. The Germans will soon be fighting off an awful lot of Russians. They will also be fighting off a lot of British soon in North Africa. On the 3rd, Axis Commander Erwin Rommel orders the withdrawal beyond the Marsa Albrega positions for a stand. His forces will have all reached there by the 12th. This is the western end of Cyrenaica, and the terrain that vehicles can cover here is a strip under 15 kilometers wide from the seaside dunes to the salt marshes. The desert reaches to within 25 kilometers of the coast. And there are also a few strong points reaching down to the oasis at Marata. So this line is like 180 kilometers long. Cyrenaica itself has highlands that are not good for large-scale tank operations. And anyhow, there's always the risk of being outflanked to the south on the open territory there. This is why Cyrenaica itself could never be permanently defended, but was swiftly evacuated by each side as soon as the other seemed to hold a clear superiority. On the other hand, it was impossible to bypass Cyrenaica when making for the Nile Valley. Thus, the route both eastward and westward ran through the Cyrenaica Peninsula, and an oversimplified account of the war in North Africa might say that it was fought largely for possession of Cyrenaica. Neither side could attempt to penetrate the enemy bastions of Egypt and Libya till it had been secured. At its western and eastern edges,
That's such. I think the word I'm looking for is dichotomy with Cyrenaica, right? Is like you can't fucking defend it. You can't. It kind of sucks. It's off. It's horrible to defend. There's nothing really about it. But then like it is so critical to the fighting there. Like you can't just get around it. Like you have to use you have to go through Cyrenaica. Like it's both so important but also so useless. You know? I love that dichotomy.
with the salt marshes in the desert, it is impossible to outflank from the south, a standard tactic in this theater. The Americans are also worried about defense in the Philippines. On the 3rd, American Army Chief of Staff George Marshall is told that there are not enough American forces to relieve the ones in the Philippines under Douglas MacArthur. Washington's obligations to the U.S. force in the Philippines and to the loyal Filipinos were to attempt to provide relief, and if this proved futile, to acknowledge that fact candidly. Washington compiled a mixed record on the former responsibility. Its record on the latter was shameful. In fact, while the War Department was aware all through December that they likely could not send reinforcements in time to save the islands, they sent a series of messages with heavy implications that such reinforcing was going to make it through. Now on the 3rd, General Dwight Eisenhower in Washington reports, it will be a long time before major reinforcements can get to the Philippines, longer than the garrison can hold out. Secretary of War Henry Stimson writes in his diary, everybody knows the chances are against our getting relief to MacArthur, but there's no use in saying so beforehand.
What? You know you can't get to him. You know you can't. You can't do anything to help. But you're going to continue to not say anything? What?
Well, MacArthur's final units have now reached Bataan Peninsula. Their withdrawal is to a large extent a success, but the supply problem I talked about 2 weeks ago is already a major issue. Already on the 5th, the garrison at Bataan goes on half rations. On the 7th, the Japanese siege of Bataan Peninsula begins. Now, MacArthur's forces at Bataan are split into the 1st and 2nd Philippine Corps, formerly the North Luzon and South Luzon forces under Jonathan Wainwright and George Parker, 22,500 and 25,000 men strong. They will defend the Abuque line at the north of the peninsula. This is only like 30-something kilometers long, but they're only defending the east and west parts of it, the very eastern and western. Those are only like 8 kilometers each. The whole middle chunk, which is like half the line, is dominated by Mount Natib, which they think impassable to military
We all know what's gonna happen, right? The Japanese are gonna go through that mountain, aren't they?
units, though impassable terrain, to quote John Whitman, is often more a state of mind than a state of nature. Japanese commander Masaharu Homa's forces entered Manila II, and he thinks his opponents are demoralized and in smaller numbers than they actually are. He gives the job of taking Bataan to Akira Nara and the 65th Brigade. This force was not formed to be a fighting force, rather an occupying force, and it is mostly made up of conscripts with a lack of much training. The attack plan is for the 141st Infantry to hit the road, the 122nd to hit the west coast, the 142nd to be in reserve, but the 9th Infantry Regiment is to march over the mountain and hit 2nd Corps in their left flank. The attacks begin on the 9th as the week ends. That fight may be beginning, but one battle is coming to an end. By the 4th at Changsha in China, the Japanese have occupied most important points in the city, but they are now in danger of being surrounded by counterattacking Chinese. So that morning, the Japanese 11th Army orders a withdrawal, which makes good sense since they're seriously running out of both food and artillery shells. But as they withdraw, they're attacked by over 20 divisions of Chinese, which completely destroys some of the Japanese units. The whole operation will really end next week, with the Japanese reporting losses of 1,670 killed and over 5,000 wounded. The Chinese figures are a bit different. For starters, they say that the Japanese did not choose to withdraw and that they took 33,941
That's a big difference. That's a pretty big difference.
killed and over 23,000 wounded. While I doubt that the actual numbers are that high, this does highlight an issue we have with the war in China: the divergence and unreliability of many of the numbers or the units, and even the narratives. Chinese losses are likelier higher than Japanese. They usually are. But this offensive was really poorly and hastily planned, and the Japanese, again, very much underestimate the number and skill of the defenders. If the battle was not the spectacular success claimed by the Chinese, it certainly demonstrated the ability of Chinese arms to inflict serious loss on Japanese forces. Moreover, the Chinese held the battlefield in the end. At this point, they are actually the only allies managing to do so against the Japanese attackers. Those Chinese armies get many of their supplies from the Burma Road. I have yet to talk much about Burma, but it is also a Japanese objective and is super important to pretty much everyone strategically. For the Americans and the Chinese, the Burma Road is the supply route to Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist army. For the British, Burma is the gateway to India. For the Japanese, it is both of these things. It's an unusual landscape, since it's only open to the south towards the ocean, with mountain ranges and major rivers blocking the other 3 sides. Also, the rivers, the rails, and the roads all run north-south. There are barely any east-west lines of communication.
Because resources! Colonialism! Yeah!
Burma is part of the British Empire, but like India, has limited self-rule. There is no love lost for the colonial overlords. In fact, Prime Minister U Saw has openly talked about his desire for independence. He also, as it turns out, has Japanese contacts. He's just been in London and en route home gave a promise to the Japanese ambassador to rebel if the Japanese invade. This message is relayed to Japan, but it's picked up and decrypted by the British, and U Saw will be arrested and then detained in Uganda. In a couple of weeks, it will also come to light that he's been sabotaged.
But now I'm not saying his desire for independence and rebellion against an imperial force is I'm saying his means of going about it was pretty fucking dumb. Like, come on, my guy. Really? You're just saying it like that to the Japanese? Like, when you are a governmental official in the imperialistic scheme? Like, what are you thinking?
Traffic on the Burma Road, including levying large taxes on goods passing through, including those sent by the US under Lend-Lease. Well, the British have expected internal revolt, but not external attack. So they only have the 1st Burma Division there, which does not have much artillery, or engineers, or equipment, or training. As for command, it's complicated. On December 8th, Burma was placed under Archie Wavell's command as commander of India. But now Wavell is in charge of ABDA, the American, British, Dutch, Australian theater. And military control of Burma comes with that. But not administrative control. That stays with India. I know. Wavell is aware of the importance of Burma to India and China, and the importance of Rangoon to Burma, as is Chiang Kai-shek, who's been telling the Allies to please secure Burma for a while now. He offers Wavell his best trained divisions and his only motorized ones to serve in Burma under the British, as well as Claire Chennault's AVG, American Volunteer Group, the Flying Tigers, who are the best air unit Chiang has.
Roar.
Wavell does not accept this offer, however. His genuine worry is that, as has been done in the past, the Chinese troops would live off the land at the expense of the local Burmese population. There is also the underlying worry of the region falling under Chinese sway as well. You can imagine how happy this makes Chiang Kai-shek, though. The Japanese are sending the 15th Army to take Burma. They are to follow the coast and take Rangoon. The 55th Division starts its march to the Burma-Thai border now on the 2nd. Should take a couple of weeks to get there. But the Japanese have already been attacking further south in Malaya. On the 5th, at an officers' conference, British Commander Arthur Parseval outlines his new plan to evacuate Kuala Lumpur and make the next defense line at the northern border of the state of Johor. He tells Lewis Heath, commanding the 3rd Indian Corps, to prevent the Japanese from taking the airfields at Kuala Lumpur until at least the 14th, because of a convoy of reinforcements arriving. So the 12th and 28th Indian Brigades from the 11th Indian Division are deployed around the Slim River region. It's good terrain for defense. The 12th covers the trunk road and the railway line, but they have only one artillery battery covering their position, and they have not built anti-tank defenses. At 3:30 a.m. on the 7th, the Japanese attack with 30 tanks and infantry support behind an artillery and mortar barrage. The 12th is just smashed. The attackers continue their charge, and by 8:40 they've taken the Slim River Bridge, advancing some 30 kilometers. To put it succinctly in Richard Frank's words, the defeat at Slim River was a catastrophe for both the 11th Indian Division and the defense of Malaya. The division lost loads of armored cars, artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, but the worst, on the 8th at roll call, the 12th musters just 423 men. 28th, just 750.
Oh, that's not good.
You can assign blame to any or several factors, but let's face it, the 11th Indian Division is absolutely exhausted after a month of solid fighting. Wavell, who arrives now in Singapore, has serious doubts about both Heath and Parseval, but he doesn't replace them. On the 8th, though, he does overrule Parseval's idea to have Australian General Gordon Bennett put in charge of Eastern Johor, and instead gives Bennett northwestern Malayan Front Command, while Heath's boys will command the eastern and southwestern coast. Like some of you out there, it's very hard for me to hear the name Gordon Bennett without thinking of the classic English TV show Only Fools and Horses, but he
Never seen it.
He is a real person and a player in this conflict. And here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 7th, American President Franklin Roosevelt submits his budget to Congress. These numbers are bigger than those I gave you just last week. Desired 1942 production, 60,000 planes, 45,000 tanks, and 8 million tons of shipping. 1943 production, 125,000 planes, 75,000 tanks, and 11 million tons of
God damn.
shipping. On the 5th, two prisoners escaped from Colditz Castle in Germany. Englishman Ari Nev and Dutchman Tony Lutane, both officers. They soon reached Swiss soil and safety. And that brings me to the end of this week of the war. A week of worry for the Allies all over Southeast Asia, the one of success in China, and a week that sees a huge new offensive begin in the Soviet Union. Even though the Allies agreed 2 weeks ago to have unity of command in each of the theaters of combat, we're seeing an awful lot of shadiness or selfishness going on already in individual commands. Wavell won't take Chang's best troops. That's a bit of a snub. And the Chinese are fighting the Japanese pretty well. And Marshall knows they can't relieve the Philippines, but isn't telling the loyal troops there. To what end? Stimson knows, but he can't say it out loud. Those troops are in trouble, as are the British in Malaya and Burma. And which is more important to hold then, Burma or Singapore? This unity thing might need to get a lot more unified, or things are likely to get a lot more confusing.
Maybe.
Stalin.
And that was week 124 of World War II, January 9th, 1942. Washington, D.C. abandons the troops in the Philippines. This was, it was another stuff happening. Nothing really to discuss. My opinions were like, just continuing to go week by week. Next one, week 125. Yeah.